for Pacifica Radio, June 29th, 2023. I'm Scott Horton. This is Anti-War Radio. All right, y'all, welcome to the show. It is Anti-War Radio. I'm your host, Scott Horton. I'm the editorial director of Antiwar.com, and I'm the author of the book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. You can find my full interview archive, almost 6,000 of them now going back to 2003, at scotthorton.org and at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. And you can follow me on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. Okay, introducing today's guest. It's Antiwar.com's news editor, Dave DeCamp. He's also the host of the daily podcast, Anti-War News, which you can find at Antiwar.com as well. Welcome back to the show. How you doing, Dave?
I'm good, Scott. Thanks for having me back.
Well, happy to have you here. So tell me all about what's going on, the latest with Russia's war in Iraq.
Yeah, so on Wednesday, President Biden was asked by a reporter about does he think Putin is weakened now because of this recent Wagner mutiny, very short-lived mutiny that happened over the weekend. And President Biden said, well, I know he's losing his war in Iraq, which I think, it's a gaffe. And I think it shows, kind of the hypocrisy of these U.S. government officials, especially Joe Biden. As a senator, he really led the charge to get enough Democrats on board to give George W. Bush the authorization to invade Iraq. And we've seen other, officials from that time make these kind of Freudian slips. The best one was a few months ago when George W. Bush was giving a speech at one of these think tank events or whatever it was. And he was talking about the war in Ukraine. And he said, this war was because of the decision of one man to launch an illegal and unjust invasion of Iraq. And he caught it right away and kind of nodded and said, well, Iraq too, and then went on to talk about Ukraine. So I think it shows it's kind of on their mind. And, it's something important that we have to remember that, this wasn't that long ago. This was only 20 years ago that the U.S. did invade a sovereign country and destroy it completely. And, when I always think of when Russia first invaded, Condoleezza Rice, of all people, went on the news and said, when you invade a sovereign nation, that's a war crime. So what she's acknowledging there is that the George W. Bush administration, the U.S. government at the time, committed a war crime by invading Iraq. And John Kerry, who I keep forgetting that he's in the Biden administration, but he's a climate envoy. He was recently grilled by a French journalist asking, okay, so you're always going on about Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. Wasn't the war in Iraq a war of aggression? And he tried to say it wasn't. And he's actually said, which was really interesting, that it was based on a lie, but we didn't know it was a lie at the time. But, if you look back at the record in 2004, after no WMDs were found, he still said he would have invaded. He ran his presidential campaign on, we're going to win the war. That was in 2004. So, these people, again, the hypocrisy of supporting this brutal war, the greatest crime of the 21st century, the war in Iraq, are the ones going out trying to lecture us about sovereignty and all that.
Yeah. Well, so I don't know if you noticed this, but there's a report. I guess there's not the audio and the video of it, but reporters quoted him from a fundraiser the night before, making this same mistake. Biden referring to Putin's onslaught on Iraq, which, again, he clearly meant to say Ukraine, but it's also clearly on his mind. And that's a pretty fair characterization of America's aggressive war. And it is an equivalency there. And, Biden as a senator shares his guilt. But when W. Bush said, Iraq too, that should be an indictment right there. That's an open confession in front of the world and a room full of witnesses that Iraq was, not some kind of weird, twisted, preemptive self-defense. It was an aggressive war. He said it himself, and he was the guy who pulled the trigger and called that shot. The one individual man who made that happen. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think with Bush, if you've seen some of his events get disrupted by people, I know Mike Preisner did it recently, screaming at him, telling him, you killed my friends. You got to think that gets to you, even if you are, George W. Bush.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he seems to be mostly like the kind of guy who just says, and I think there are quotes of him saying, oh, you know what? Decisions are things that we make. I don't second guess the past. I just don't live my life that way, And I believe him, right? That mostly it's all just water off a duck's back. Some stuff that happened, whatever.
Yeah, especially because overall, he's not held accountable for that at all. He's been completely whitewashed by the media, especially when Trump was in. You had all these Democrats saying, oh, we miss George W. Bush.
Yeah.
So he's totally off the hook.
Well, in the crowd, it was at SMU when he said, oh, Iraq too, and whatever. They all just laughed and covered for him. Nobody there was like, yeah, Humph, I know a guy who died in that thing or something important about it. They were all like, haha, yeah, we still love you, George. And then, by the way, on John Kerry's thing, too, was funny, the French interview where he says, I opposed it. We voted for it. And then he says, but once we knew it was a lie, then we did the right thing, which is what? Keep fighting more longer? And we knew it was a lie by the summer 2003. They didn't pull their troops out by the end of 2011. What the hell is he talking about? As you said, he ran on winning it.
Yeah, and there is no reckoning for any of these people, especially Joe Biden when he ran for president in 2020. He just lied about the fact that he supported the war after the invasion because, of course, he voted to give the authorization. And then for years after, he defended it, even though when they knew there was no WMDs, it turned out, they knew it was a lie. He defended it. But when he ran for president, he just lied and said, no, I was against it after, we went in. So you could just lie about something that happened, not that long ago.
You know
and
what?
Still get elected.
There's a great clip, too, where these two veterans confront him and they go, hey, you sent us to war on a lie. We fought in Iraq. And he says, well, my son was in Iraq and he died too, which, he died of the Iraq war, but not in the Iraq war. But it's probable that he got brain cancer from the burn pits, but that still ain't quite the same. And they go, yeah, well, that's bad or whatever. And he goes, well, you better not say anything about him. And they go, we didn't. You're the one who brought him up. And he goes, yeah, that's what I thought. And walks away. And that's all he got was, look, I got my own son killed in that thing, so leave me alone.
Yeah, and when he was pulling out of Afghanistan, when the whole media turned on him for that, he came out and again mentioned his son. It was interesting, to say, just bringing up his son, when he's trying to justify ending a war. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, he just brings him up no matter what. He'll be at somebody's funeral. He brought, he went to the funeral when he was vice president for the guys that died in Benghazi, and he started talking about his son. I was like, actually, today is about their sons, dude, not yours, so shut up. And so, yeah, anyway, let's talk about all the people that he's sending to their deaths, and then Ukraine is going to lose 4 provinces anyway. How's the counteroffensive going there, Dave, after 16 months of war? Tens of thousands of people exploded to death over there.
Yeah, so it's been a few weeks now since Ukraine launched their counteroffensive, this long-awaited, very highly anticipated counteroffensive. And, based on just looking at the battlefield, the battle lines, they virtually haven't changed. Ukraine has claimed to gain a few small villages, but they've taken heavy losses, according to, U.S. and other Western officials speaking to the media. There's been a lot of accounts. And it's interesting the way that they word these things. This one U.S. official speaking to CNN said that counteroffensive isn't meeting expectations. Like it's kind of the U.S. has these expectations for Ukraine, and they're unhappy that they're able to, break through Russia's defenses. And we do know that this is a completely, at this point, NATO funded and trained army equipped with NATO equipment. And we know that they lost a lot of armored vehicles, at least 17 Bradley fighting vehicles that the U.S. provided them. The U.S. just announced that they're sending more Bradleys. They're asking Germany to replace all the Leopard tanks that they have lost in the battle as well. So it's definitely not going well. And they can't get through. Russia laid a lot of minefields. They're just not breaking through the Russian defenses. And Ukraine is saying now, Ukraine's defense minister and Zelensky, actually, they both admitted that it's going slower than they wanted it to. But Reznikov, the defense minister, he said yesterday that, this is just the beginning. We haven't used all of our brigades yet. They're saying that they still have 9 more brigades, which is, about 4,000 troops in each brigade that are, again, equipped with NATO gear, and they were trained in Europe, trained in Germany and in the UK and in other countries. So they're saying, it's barely begun yet. And I know Russia is saying, I believe they're putting the Ukrainian casualties around 10,000, which includes dead and wounded. Who knows if that's the accurate number? But if Ukraine's saying that they still have 9 more brigades, then I think that this thing is still going to drag out for a while. I don't know if we're going to see many Ukrainian territorial gains. And, we actually know, thanks to the Discord leaks and other reports, just media reports, U.S. officials speaking anonymously, that the Biden administration didn't think that Ukraine could regain much territory. They didn't think that it was really going to go well. They're preparing for a failed counteroffensive. Yet publicly they're saying, let's go, and they're pushing for it, and rejected diplomacy, rejected the idea of a ceasefire. So they're sending, these Ukrainian men and to their death because, the U.S. wants to keep, just keep Russia bogged down in this war, it seems like.
It's Antiwar Radio. I'm Scott Horton talking with Dave DeCamp from Antiwar.com. Can you talk to us a little bit about how the offensive here by Ukraine plays into this sort of pseudo mutiny that played out in Russia last week?
Yeah, so the Wagner mutiny. So the Wagner group, this private mercenary force that is led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, who's this Russian oligarch who got his start owning, he ran restaurants. He was a hot dog vendor, they say, which is interesting. There's actually a picture of him catering a dinner between Putin and George W. Bush, back in the day. But this Wagner force was played a huge role in Russia's war for the first, year and a half, about specifically fighting in Bakhmut for about 9 months, this bloody battle over this small city in eastern Donetsk. And it was mainly the Wagner fighters, and Prigozhin was recruiting prisoners. And so it was mainly them that were slogging through this battle, very long and tough battle. It became known as the meat grinder, and they won that city for the Russians. But since then, towards the end, the last few months, Prigozhin started really going after Russia's military establishment. The Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, and Gerasimov, who's the Russian commander in charge of the war in Ukraine, what Russia calls their special military operation. So then after the Battle of Bakhmut, his men pulled out, and this counteroffensive started. And while his men were, fighting and dying in Bakhmut, Russia mobilized all these troops, Russian regular forces, and solidified their defensive lines to prepare for a Ukrainian counteroffensive. So now that the counteroffensive started, you have the regular Russian soldiers doing the fighting. And because of Prigozhin's, mouth, really, all these videos he put out on Telegram, going after Russia's military leaders, they said on June 10th that all volunteer fighters, including the Wagner group, need to sign contracts with the Russian Defense Ministry. So that would have put the Wagner group under control of the Russian military, and Prigozhin would have lost it. Is what it seems like would have been the result of that. And that was a big motivation for Prigozhin to launch what was this very short-lived uprising this past Friday. And that's what he said so himself after the fact. He claimed that he was not trying to overthrow the government. He said he was trying to preserve Wagner. And really the way things played out there was he took his men, and it's not clear if I don't think all of the Wagner fighters went along with this, but there's about 25,000 of them. It's not clear exactly how many were involved, but he marched them to Rostov in Russia, from their camps in Ukraine. And he started this mutiny claiming that Russian airstrikes hit his men and killed them. That has not been confirmed. I haven't seen any evidence to prove that. But anyway, that was his pretext for launching this mutiny. And they marched to Rostov and captured a military base. There was little resistance from the Russian military. Somewhere along this march, they did shoot down some Russian aircraft, planes and helicopters. According to Russian media reports, about 20 Russian airmen died in this mutiny. That hasn't been confirmed by the Russian Defense Ministry, but we do know Putin did say that Russian airmen were killed, and Prigozhin did admit that his men fired on Russian aircraft. So we know that's, that did happen. Just not clear exactly how many died. So then Prigozhin took this base and his men were marching toward Moscow. And, 24 hours after the thing started, it ended. And what happened was Lukashenko, the Belarusian president, mediated a deal between Putin and Prigozhin. And Prigozhin is now in Belarus, where he lives in exile. And his Wagner fighters have three options. They can either sign contracts with the Russian Defense Ministry, they can go live in Belarus, or they can quit, being mercenaries and go home to their families. So that's the situation now. And there's all these rumors in Western media that Surovikin, who is the deputy commander of Russia's war effort in Ukraine, he was the commander from October to January, and Prigozhin liked him. He always said he should be in charge. There's all these rumors in Western media that he knew, that he had knowledge of this coup, that he might have been involved. But I think that might be some kind of Western intelligence information warfare against Russia, just because there was no sign during this thing that the military, anybody in the military, got on board or was involved. And he actually put out a video telling Prigozhin, to lay down his arms right when this thing happened. But that's it's really going around that he hasn't been, that he might have been arrested, but we haven't seen any confirmation of that from the Russian side.
Hang on just 1 second. Hey, y'all, the audiobook of my book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, is finally done. Yes, of course, read by me. It's available at Audible, Amazon, Apple Books, and soon on Google Play and whatever other options there are out there. It's my history of America's war on terrorism, from 1979 through today. Give it a listen and see if you agree. It's time to just come home. Enough Already. Time to End the War on Terrorism. The audiobook. Hey guys, I've had a lot of great webmasters over the years, but the team at expanddesigns.com have by far been the most competent and reliable. Harley Abbott and his team have made great sites for the show and the Institute, and they keep them running well, suggesting and making improvements all along. Make a deal with expanddesigns.com for your new business or news site. They will take care of you. Use the promo code SCOTT and save $500. That's expanddesigns.com. Man, I wish I was in school so I could drop out and sign up for Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom instead. Tom has done such a great job on putting together a classical curriculum for everyone from junior high schoolers on up through the postgraduate level. And it's all very reasonably priced. Just make sure you click through from the link in the right margin at scotthorton.org. Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. Real history, real economics, real education.
Yeah, that might all be part of the same set of lies. I guess we'll have to see about that. But now, so I didn't think it was really going to come to anything, and I was surprised to see Putin's video statement where he brought up the 1917 revolution and really called this treason. So it seemed like passing the message through Lukashenko wasn't doing the job. He really felt like he had to lay the law down in that way. And so then that's being read in two ways, right? And maybe there's truth in both of them to a degree. I don't know what you think, but that one, oh my God, this shows his weakness. Or two, this shows his strength. That even with, probably the greatest challenge to his authority of his presidency so far, he went on TV and he said, don't do that. And then it ended. And so, with, I guess you're saying maybe a few casualties from a couple of helicopters getting shot down being the extent of it. So, I don't know. What do you think about that? Because, of course, the narrative on Twitter and in Washington was, all right, this is the end of Putin. I guess we're rooting for the felon sprung from prison to overthrow the Russian government and take charge of those H-bombs.
Yeah. So that was it was to the disappointment of, the neocons and a lot of the pro-Ukraine crowd that this thing ended so quickly. So, yeah, I mean, that is the big question is, did this make Putin weaker or did it make him stronger? And I think it is significant that it did end so quickly with little bloodshed. I mean, this thing could have escalated into slaughter, a big bloody, violent battle inside Russia, and that would have been really bad for Putin. And from what I understand from people inside Russia and people that know Russia well, Prigozhin was pretty liked by Russian people because he was leading that battle in Bakhmut. But this kind of soured him for a lot of people because they don't want this bloody battle going on inside Russia. So in a way, maybe some of the people that might have agreed with his, rhetoric of what he was saying about Russia's military leadership might be siding more now with Shoigu, with, Putin. So, and what the hawks in the U.S. are doing in Congress, they're using this now as, see, this means that, Putin's on the fence. We got to keep arming Ukraine. And I think that's kind of going to be the unfortunate result of this, is that they're going to use this to justify keeping this war going and funding, keeping the aid spigot open and just continuing to pour weapons. They saw blood, I think, and now they want to keep it going in hopes that they can really destabilize Russia, because we know, even though Russia has 6,000 nukes, a lot of the people in Washington, their dream is to see Putin, taken down, and for the Russian government as we know it to collapse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even for the nation to be broken up into 10 pieces or more, or this kind of thing. And yeah, Seymour Hersh in his piece this morning quotes Antony Blinken saying, yeah, this shows real weakness and this ought to give Ukraine a real advantage on the ground. Mm-hmm. And Hersh is saying, oh, come on, man. That's just not true. And it's, anybody could have predicted this a year ago, that they're going to lose at least Donetsk and Luhansk. And then ever since last September, it's looking like they're going to at least lose most of Zaporozhye and Kherson, if not all of them. Mm-hmm. And that's after the peace deal's signed, man. Like, I don't know what offensive they think that they're going to do next. The fall offensive that's going to finally crack this nut, or, But it's just like the Iraq or the Afghan wars, whatever. They just keep them going as long as they can until finally they have to just give up and start a new one.
Yeah, and, that's what it seems like. I can't imagine this thing ending anytime soon now. From Russia's point of view, time is on their side, and they're just going to, hope that the West gives up before, they can't keep this war going. But I think, in the next year, 2 years, I would be surprised if this thing comes to an end, just where we're at right now. Even, hopefully the tide does turn in the U.S. That's what we really need, is for, more people in Congress to oppose funding Ukraine, funding this war. Maybe a failed counteroffensive will edge more people in that direction, but, we'll see.
Yeah, it's really unbelievable to me that this isn't the highest priority of all 7 billion Earthlings, to bring an end to the fighting, a ceasefire, where whatever the problem is, there's got to be a better way to resolve it than this. Send the problem resolvers to go over there and shake hands and sign papers and figure out something. It's just crazy that this is going on.
Well, and Blinken, it's not even, Blinken didn't just reject a ceasefire when he gave a speech, it was earlier this month. He disparaged other countries that are calling for peace talks, that are calling for a ceasefire, like China, like many African nations, like Brazil, South Africa, I mentioned already, Indonesia, a lot of countries in Asia. Not just saying, no, we don't want a ceasefire, saying, what are you doing? Calling for peace talks. You're on the side of the aggressor. You want to reward aggression. It's just completely insane rhetoric from the Secretary of State. And we have an interesting story at the top of Antiwar.com today that Kyle Anzalone wrote. And it's Lavrov saying that, when we want to talk to the U.S., we talk to Jake Sullivan because Blinken doesn't want to talk. And it's just insane that Blinken and Lavrov have only had 2 conversations that we know about since this invasion. And one of them was a 10-minute chat on the sidelines of the G20 summit because he didn't want to meet him there, just a little talk. Yeah. And it's just really shameful. And in a sane country, Blinken, wouldn't have a job like this.
Is there a deep dive anywhere on how Jake Sullivan is the real president of the United States right now? Somebody must have done a real write-up, because when the president is this aloof, somebody has to run the thing. And of course, even if Blinken is as hands-on as can be, he's still over at state. But in the White House, of course, it's, by definition, it's Sullivan that runs the NSC. But he, apparently is calling all of these shots, or if not him, who?
Yeah, Rick Sterling just wrote a good background on Jake Sullivan for antiwar.com if people want to check that out.
Oh, great.
But yeah, he is the one that's definitely calling the shots now, Sullivan.
Crazy.
And
that
at
doesn't
least
make me
he's
feel
more
better.
willing to talk to people than Blinken is.
Yeah. At least he's taking phone calls. We'll settle for that's at least happening, as opposed to, as you're saying, Blinken, who's just the worst diplomat since the last one. Who was what, Pompeo?
Pompeo, yeah. It's amazing that he might be worse than Pompeo, because Pompeo is, just terrible.
Look, I saw this headline and I thought maybe this isn't true, Dave DeCamp. Is it really right? But then, I saw the video. It's true. Zelensky said he's not going to hold a presidential election as long as the war's going on.
Yeah. So, this is the American people are being sold that we need to, spend $113 billion on this war to preserve democracy. But Zelensky is saying that, nope, there's not going to be any elections. We can't have elections during martial law. Sorry, that's the story. And, he's consolidated power, of course, since the invasion started, declaring martial law, banning opposition parties, nationalizing the television news. And, this is, again, we're all supposed to believe that this is the fight for democracy, but there's no elections. His term is due to expire in 2024. And he's saying that, he's trying to blame it on Russia, saying that as long as there's a war, we can't have elections. And the parliamentary elections are supposed to be held in October of this year, and they won't happen either. Both him and the speaker of the Ukrainian parliament have said that.
I saw somebody did a great collage of clips of, must have been dozens of American officials and media personalities saying this is a fight for democracy over there. And then, sorry, we're suspending the elections. And, by the way, for people who don't know this history, during America's Civil War, Abraham Lincoln went ahead and held an election, and it was an election that he was sure he was going to lose. And he held it anyway. But, in Ukraine, and I love, this is the community notes on Twitter, is, you should know that it's an objective fact, of course, that according to the Ukrainian constitution, no elections are held while martial law remains in effect. And the current president issued a decree introducing martial law due to the war. So there you go. It is the democracy after all.
Yeah. And, when we talk about the power that he's consolidated and the authorities that he's given himself under martial law, one of the saddest stories I've read of this war was actually a report in the Wall Street Journal that it was an account from a few men who were part of this small battalion that were mobilized for war, and were sent into the battlefield in Bakhmut after 2 days of, not even getting training. And one of them said they never fired a rifle. And just sending these people into this meat grinder to be slaughtered because they wanted to keep defending the city of Bakhmut for some reason. That's the kind of things that are happening to people inside Ukraine. And it's just, really horrific. And that was another thing, I wrote a story on that, and it was on Twitter, and people got really mad at us for some reason for covering that fact. They say it's wartime. Of course this happens. And that's kind of the same thing they're saying about the election. Don't you know anything? It's war. Of course, they're going to throw, a 50-something-year-old guy with health problems into, the bloodiest battle that's, happened this century. It's just like, really.
What a damn mess. Thank goodness it hasn't turned to a nuclear war yet. I guess you did say that Lavrov mentioned nukes, that this is evolving into a much more dangerous situation, huh?
Yeah, well, he just made the warning of, the lack of communication and the just current situation. There's definitely a higher risk of nuclear war, and that's something Joe Biden has admitted a few times now. But he hasn't done anything to change that. All his policies are making that more likely.
And to be clear, neither side's threatening nuclear war. Both sides are saying, geez, we're in danger of stumbling into one or sleepwalking into one or just kind of having an inadvertent one anyway, because that's the kind of fire we're playing with, fighting a proxy war right on Russia's border this way. And everybody acknowledges that, but they just keep on anyway. It's just unreal.
And their attitude is, he hasn't dropped a nuke yet, so he's probably not gonna.
I know, and they keep saying that too.
And that's actually what they say. Yeah, they say, "Oh, well,
I have a little collection of those." All right. Anyway, that's the bad news with the great Dave DeCamp. He is the host of Antiwar News, and he is our news editor at antiwar.com, where we keep all the bad news for you all day, every day there. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Scott.
And that's Antiwar Radio for this week. I'm your host, Scott Horton. I'm the editorial director of antiwar.com, and I'm also the host of the Scott Horton Show. You can find my full archive, almost 6,000 of them going back to 2003 now, at scotthorton.org. And I am here every Thursday from 2:30 to 3 on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. See you next week.